In the quiet suburbs of Lagos, where bougainvillea framed the gates of polished homes and the hum of generators filled the night air, life appeared calm, predictable, safe. Behind the walls of one pristine duplex, the ideal family lived what many would call an enviable life, wealthy, well-respected, and seemingly untouched by chaos. Evelyn, a powerful businesswoman in her 40s, balanced motherhood with boardrooms. Alfred, her husband, a soft-spoken civil engineer, lived with his head buried in blueprints and silence. Their 3 young children, energetic and full of laughter, were the heartbeat of their home. Into this world stepped Juliet, bright-eyed, 22, newly arrived from Calabar. She came with nothing but a suitcase, a worn Bible, and a heart full of dreams. Hired as a live-in nanny, her duties were simple: care for the children, manage the house during Evelyn's frequent business trips, and, above all else, stay out of trouble. And for a while she did. Juliet poured herself into the lives of the children, earning their love and trust. She stayed respectful, reserved, invisible when needed. She never overstepped. But behind the smiles, behind the glass doors and manicured lawns, something else stirred. A silence, a loneliness, a hunger. And then came one particular Monday evening, ordinary in every way but destined to change everything. That night, under the flicker of the TV screen and the weight of unspoken desires, a moment unfolded. One Juliet never planned for, one Alfred never expected. And what started as an innocent job would unravel into a tale of temptation, secrecy, and betrayal. Juliet had always had a way with children. Back in her neighborhood in Calabar, she was the girl every parent trusted and every child adored. Her laughter was bright, her patience seemingly endless, and her ability to comfort a crying toddler was nothing short of magical. It wasn't something she had been taught, it came naturally. She wasn't just a nanny. She was a caregiver, a storyteller, a quiet protector of little hearts. But life in Calabar was hard. Her family's struggles were real, and opportunities were few and far between. So when a friend in Lagos told her about a live-in nanny job with a well-to-do family in Lagos, she didn't hesitate. She packed her modest belongings, said a tearful goodbye to her younger siblings, and boarded a bus toward the unknown. Hope clutched tightly in her chest. The home that awaited her was unlike anything she'd ever known. A 2-story house in a serene estate, wide marble floors, sparkling chandeliers, landscaped gardens. Felt like something out of a dream or a movie. Evelyn, her new employer, was a woman who commanded presence. In her mid-40s, she was sharp, impeccably dressed, and ran her business empire with discipline. She was not unkind, but she wasn't overly warm either. She observed Juliet keenly during the interview, as if trying to see through her smile. But Juliet's sincerity eventually broke through, and Evelyn offered her the position. The pay was generous. The private room Juliet was given felt luxurious. And the children, aged 3, 5, and 7, were everything she loved about her work. Curious, playful, affectionate, and at times, wonderfully chaotic. Juliet quickly settled into the rhythm of the house. Mornings were filled with breakfast chaos and school runs. Afternoons were quieter, lunches, nap times, homework. Evenings were playful, tender, and full of bedtime stories. And then there was Alfred, Evelyn's husband, tall, dark-skinned, and calm in a way that contrasted with the energy around him. A civil engineer in his early 50s, Alfred was a quiet presence in the home. He often came back late from work, tucked away in his study or silently watching the news in the evenings. He was polite to Juliet, always with a small nod or a low-toned "good evening." But nothing more. He never lingered, never stared, never crossed a line. At least, not at first. To Juliet, he was just Olga, the man of the house, nothing more. And yet, something about his silence felt heavier as time passed. Still, she remained focused. This job meant everything to her. Security, stability, and a future for her and her family. She was determined not to let anything get in the way. But in a house where walls whispered, and glances sometimes lasted a second too long, Juliet was about to learn that even the most carefully built boundaries can bend when desire quietly slips through the cracks. The departure. That Monday morning began like any other, at least on the surface. The sun rose gently over the quiet suburb, casting a soft, golden light through the windows of the home. The children were up early, their little feet padding across the hallway as they chased each other with the energy only youth could sustain. Evelyn, elegant in a tailored navy blue suit, moved briskly around the house, finishing last-minute packing and checking her phone for updates from her office. Her voice carried through the hall as she issued a few reminders, mostly directed at Juliet. "The laundry schedule is on the fridge," she called. "David likes his cereal without milk. And make sure Tolu gets his allergy meds before lunch." Juliet nodded, pen in hand, scribbling down mental notes she already knew by heart. She had been working for the family for nearly 8 months. The children adored her. The routine was familiar, efficient. She knew this house better than she knew her own. At the doorway, Evelyn knelt down and embraced her children tightly, one by one. "Be good for Juliet," she said warmly, kissing the top of each head. "Mummy will be back before the weekend, all right?" The children clung to her, pouting, but she smiled brightly and stood. Then, turning to Juliet, she handed over a folded sheet of paper. "Just a few reminders," she said with a forced laugh. "You probably don't need it." Juliet accepted the paper with a polite smile. "And Juliet," Evelyn added, pausing for just a heartbeat, "take care of my children, and keep Alfred company if you can. He hates being alone." Her tone was casual, but something lingered in her words. A slight shift in her eyes, almost calculated. Juliet blinked. "Of course, ma'am." She shrugged it off. Her focus was the children, the home, nothing more. But the words stayed with her longer than they should have. Alfred had barely come downstairs. He emerged just as Evelyn was stepping out with her luggage. Their exchange was brief. A quick kiss on the cheek, a quiet goodbye. There was no warmth in their touch, no softness in their parting. Juliet noticed. As Evelyn's car pulled out of the driveway, the house seemed to exhale into silence. The children ran off to continue playing, and Juliet returned to her duties with quiet focus. But something felt different. Not wrong, just different. The lady of the house was gone. And for the first time in a long while, Juliet and Alfred were alone. Nightfall. By 8 p.m., the house had settled into a peaceful quiet. The children were tucked into bed, their giggles fading into sleepy murmurs as Juliet kissed them goodnight and gently closed their doors. The scent of bubble bath still lingered in the hallway, mixing with the faint aroma of baked chicken and rosemary from dinner. The home felt calm, safe, a picture of domestic order. Juliet, tired from a long day of caring, cleaning, and chasing after 3 little ones, returned to her room for a shower. The hot water relaxed her muscles, washing away the crumbs of the day. Her hair was damp as she toweled off, and she reached for something light and comfortable, an old short nightgown, soft and familiar. She had worn it many times before, usually when retreating to her room after the kids were asleep. But tonight, perhaps out of comfort, or perhaps unknowingly guided by something deeper, she wore it into the living room. The fabric clung delicately to her frame. Her cleavage peeked out with each breath. The hem skimmed the top of her thighs. It wasn't vulgar, just unfiltered, natural, and in the soft glow of nightfall, she looked ethereal. Juliet curled up on the couch, hugging a pillow to her chest, her legs folded to the side. She flipped through a few channels before settling on a romantic drama. One of those slow-burning love stories that explored heartbreak, longing, and passion unfulfilled. The lights were dimmed to a low amber hue, and the television screen cast flickering shadows across the room. Outside, the wind whispered through the leaves. Inside, the only sounds were the soft hum of the TV and Juliet's rhythmic breathing. She sipped from a glass of water. She didn't expect company. And then, the quiet was interrupted. Alfred walked in. He had showered too. His hair was damp, his shirt slightly unbuttoned at the collar. In his hand was a half-filled glass of wine, and in his eyes, a weariness that only someone who had carried the weight of a fractured marriage could wear. He paused at the doorway, caught off guard. Juliet looked up and met his gaze. She didn't stand, didn't scramble to cover herself. The blanket was within reach, but something in her hesitated. Their eyes locked. For a moment, neither of them moved. Neither of them spoke. The television played on, but it had faded into the background. The real drama was unfolding silently between them. Alfred cleared his throat. "I didn't know you were still up." Juliet smiled gently, not rising from her place on the couch. "Just watching something to wind down. The house is quiet." He nodded slowly, stepping inside. "Yeah, it's peaceful." He sat at the far end of the couch. Not too close, but not far enough. The silence settled around them once more. But this time, it was heavier, denser, laden with something unspoken. Something that neither of them fully understood, but both of them felt. And so began a night that would change everything. A silent tension. The clock ticked softly in the background, each second echoing louder than it should have. Alfred sat at the far end of the couch, his posture stiff, hands resting on his thighs, eyes fixed on the television screen. But he wasn't watching. Not really. The scene playing out before him blurred into a haze of moving images and muffled dialogue. Juliet sat a few feet away, legs tucked underneath her, arms loosely crossed, pretending to be just as absorbed in the film. But neither of them was truly present in the story on the screen. The silence between them was not awkward, but it wasn't easy either. It was charged, tight, heavy with something neither had spoken aloud. Alfred hadn't said a word since he entered the room. He'd simply nodded at Juliet when he walked in, taken his place on the couch and said nothing more. But his presence was unmistakably loud. Juliet could feel it, like heat at her side. She sensed him glance at her once, then again. She didn't look back immediately, but she felt his gaze as surely as if he had touched her. When she finally turned to meet his eyes, he quickly looked away, pretending to be engrossed in the movie. Too quickly, too deliberate. It made her heart skip a beat. There was a subtle tension in his jaw, the kind that comes from holding back, from thinking too much. Juliet's eyes shifted, and for a brief moment, she noticed the outline beneath his trousers. A natural reaction perhaps, but one that couldn't be ignored. Her breath hitched slightly. She said nothing, but her body knew, and his did too. The air between them thickened, like the seconds before a thunderstorm. It wasn't what had been said, but what hadn't. Not what had been done, but what could be. The kind of tension that drips slowly, like honey, impossible to ignore once you've tasted it. Juliet shifted slightly in her seat. Not provocatively, just nervously. She smoothed her dress against her thighs, more aware of her body than she'd been moments ago. Alfred didn't look, but his hands clenched briefly on his lap. Still, no one spoke. The television continued its monologue, filling the room with false noise. But the true conversation, the real dialogue, was silent. A shared breath, a glance too long, a heartbeat that didn't follow the rhythm of calm. They both knew it. Something had begun to stir. Not yet spoken, not yet touched, but undeniably present. A silent tension that neither could deny. The flirtation. The living room was dimly lit, the soft glow of the television flickering across the walls like candlelight. The children had gone to bed hours ago, and the house had settled into a hush, the kind of quiet that made every breath, every movement, feel louder. Juliet sat on one end of the couch, legs curled beneath her, a throw blanket draped casually over her knees. She had chosen a romantic film, a seasonal love story that played out against the backdrop of soft music, stolen glances, and inevitable kisses. It was the kind of movie she usually watched alone. But tonight, Alfred had joined her. At first, their attention was fixed on the screen. It was safe, detached, innocent. Then came a comedic moment, a clumsy but sweet gesture by the male lead. Juliet laughed, freely, fully. Her voice rang like wind chimes, unexpectedly light in the stillness. Alfred looked over, and for a moment he didn't see the nanny. He saw a young woman, vibrant, alive, beautiful. "You watch love stories?" she asked teasingly, glancing sideways with a playful smirk. He hesitated for just a second. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, replied, "Sometimes, when there's someone to enjoy it with." She smiled, her cheeks warming under his gaze. The moment felt light, but under the surface, something stirred. It was harmless, wasn't it? A few minutes passed. The space between them remained, but somehow it felt smaller. The couch hadn't shifted, but their awareness of each other had. Juliet shifted slightly, adjusting the blanket, and her leg brushed his. She didn't pull away. He cleared his throat softly and returned his gaze to the screen, pretending to be absorbed in the unfolding scene. But his mind was racing, not with lust yet, but with curiosity, with a strange new ache that he hadn't felt in years. They sat like that for nearly an hour, close, but not too close. Their arms never touched, their hands never met, but the silence between them, soft, thick, magnetic, grew louder than the movie. Every heartbeat echoed. Every breath was shared air. Every glance, a question left unanswered. Juliet felt it. Alfred felt it. They said nothing, did nothing, but something had already begun. A flirtation, subtle, dangerous, and thrilling. The kind that creeps in like fog, unnoticed, until you're surrounded. A dangerous line. It happened in a moment too ordinary to be suspicious. They were sitting side by side on the couch, watching the end of a family film with the children. The youngest had fallen asleep, curled up in Juliet's lap. The others had drifted off minutes earlier, sprawled between pillows and blankets, their little chests rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Alfred reached to adjust the blanket on his son's shoulder. Juliet moved at the same time to gently shift the toddler resting against her. And then it happened. Their hands brushed. Not a full touch, not a hold, just a moment of unexpected skin against skin. A spark. Juliet froze. Her hand lingered longer than it should have, half a second too long. Enough for Alfred to notice. She glanced at him cautiously. His expression had changed. It was no longer casual or friendly. The mask of politeness had slipped. In its place, curiosity, hunger, loneliness. It wasn't leering or crude, but it was charged. Vulnerable, unspoken. Juliet's breath caught. Her heartbeat quickened. Not from fear, but from the sudden awareness that something between them had shifted. She wasn't just the nanny anymore. Not in that moment. And Alfred wasn't just the man of the house. They were two people on the edge of something dangerous. Without another word, she stood abruptly, careful not to wake the sleeping child in her arms. Her voice was soft but strained. "Good night, sir." She didn't wait for a response. She gently placed the sleeping toddler in bed, closed the door to the children's room, and disappeared into her own. Alfred remained seated on the couch, staring blankly at the credits rolling on the television. The room was filled with silence, but his mind wasn't. It echoed with questions, desires, guilt. In her room, Juliet sat on the edge of her bed, her chest rising and falling as if she had just run a marathon. Her hands were still trembling. She stared at them, the same fingers that had brushed against his accidentally. Or maybe not. She couldn't sleep. Neither could he. They both lay awake, separated by walls, but connected by a shared moment neither of them could forget. The house was quiet. The children dreamed peacefully. But in the adult silence, a dangerous line had been crossed. Not in deed, but in thought. And thoughts are how every affair begins. The secret draws closer. The days that followed were laced with tension. Quiet, unspoken, but deeply felt. Evelyn's business trip, originally planned for 3 days, stretched into the following week. An urgent opportunity in another city, she'd said in a rushed call to Alfred. Her voice was upbeat, distracted, hurried. Too hurried to notice the silence on the other end of the line. Back at home, the air was different. The children laughed, played, and demanded Juliet's attention as usual. But something beneath the routine had shifted. There was a new current in the house. A spark neither Alfred nor Juliet dared name aloud. The quiet spaces between them had become louder than words. Longer glances, lingering hands when passing plates at dinner, shared silences that felt intimate rather than awkward. Then came the evening that deepened the unspoken. Juliet had just finished cleaning up after dinner. The children were tucked in, their soft breathing drifting from their bedrooms like distant waves. Something pulled her outside, to the cool air, the rustling leaves, and to Alfred. She found him sitting alone on the back patio, a glass of red wine in his hand, the last light of the sun slipping beneath the horizon. "You look troubled," she said softly, stepping into the golden twilight. He looked up at her, surprised, but not displeased. "I am," he admitted after a long pause. "It's complicated." Juliet sat beside him, folding her arms over her knees. "I know," she said, So is life. A silence settled between them, not heavy, but thoughtful. For the first time, they spoke not as employer and nanny, but as two souls carrying burdens they hadn't dared share. Juliet opened up about her childhood in the village, her dreams that had led her to the city, and the disappointments that followed. She spoke of how she longed to matter, to be seen, heard, wanted. Alfred, in turn, spoke of his failing marriage. He didn't speak with anger or bitterness. He spoke with resignation. "She used to laugh at my jokes," he said. "Now I barely get a glance. The children, the business, they consume her. And I get what's left, if anything. I feel invisible." His voice cracked at the edge, vulnerable and raw. Juliet didn't say much in response. She didn't need to. Her presence was comfort enough, her gaze, understanding. She had known neglect too, different but similar. Hers was the ache of being alone in a crowded world. His was the ache of being lonely beside the one who once swore to love him forever. They sat together for a long time, the night deepening around them. A breeze swept through the garden, carrying the scent of jasmine. The moon peeked out from behind the clouds, casting a soft glow on the two figures seated side by side, close but not touching. Yet something had shifted. A boundary was weakening. Every conversation drew them closer. Every glance lingered longer. Every night grew heavier with tension. The secret, whatever it would become, was drawing near. And both of them, deep down, knew it. The kiss that changed everything. It happened slowly. A shared laugh over a clumsy joke the kids had made. A lingering gaze that lasted just a moment too long. A brush of fingertips when reaching for the same cup in the kitchen. A silence that said more than words ever could. The tension had been building for weeks. Unspoken, simmering, forbidden. That evening, the house was quiet. The children had long gone to sleep, and Juliet had just finished tidying up the living room. Alfred stood by the doorframe, watching her. She was glowing, not with makeup or jewelry, but with youth, with energy, with life. And for a man who had been living in quiet marital absence, she was a spark in the darkness. "Good night," she whispered, her voice gentle, almost reluctant to end the evening. But he didn't respond with words. Instead, he stepped forward. Slowly, cautiously, his eyes searching hers for any sign to stop. He kissed her softly, on the lips, hesitantly, like a man unsure of whether to proceed but already too far gone to retreat. And Juliet didn't stop him. She had wanted this, needed it. The way he looked at her made her feel desired, not as a nanny, but as a woman. A beautiful, radiant woman. He brushed her hair aside, revealing the curve of her left shoulder and the softness of her neck. His fingers traced her face, mapping her beauty with reverence, from her oval cheeks to the tender hollow of her throat. She trembled slightly under his touch, but she didn't pull away. Then his lips found the space between her cleavage, kissing her gently, almost worshipfully. As his hands wandered across her body, lingering on every curve, every place untouched for too long, she closed her eyes and exhaled as one of his hands slid around to her panties, caressing her buttocks with a mix of hunger and tenderness. His other hand held the back of her neck, anchoring her in a kiss that grew wild and intense. She moaned softly, half in pleasure, half in disbelief, her body awakening beneath his touch. Without a word, Alfred lifted her into his arms and carried her to the bed in her room. There was no hesitation now. Only heat, only breath, only unspoken confessions between their heartbeats. He undressed her slowly, unwrapping her like a fragile gift. He kissed her forehead, her chin, her neck, each kiss a silent apology and a plea for more. As he moved over her, Juliet reached down, finding his manhood, guiding him with trembling hands. He slid off her panties, eyes never leaving hers, and in that charged silence, they collided. What followed was a storm, a wild, explosive dance of two bodies desperate to be seen, to be touched, to be known. And when it was over, silence returned, but this time heavy, different, because just like that, the line was crossed, and nothing would ever be the same again. Whispers and regret. The morning after was silent, not the peaceful kind of silence, but the heavy kind, the kind that filled every room, lingered in every corner, and clung to every breath like humidity before a storm. Juliet rose early, earlier than usual. Her body ached from the emotional weight of the night before, and her soul felt unfamiliar. She wrapped herself in a long robe, covering the nightgown that now felt shameful against her skin. As she walked through the hallway, her footsteps seemed louder, echoing against the tiled floor like accusations. In the bathroom, she stood in front of the mirror and froze. She looked at herself, really looked, and something felt wrong, as if the person in the reflection was a stranger wearing her skin. Her eyes were tired. Her lips were swollen. Her collarbone bore the faintest red mark where his mouth had lingered the night before. "Who are you?" she whispered to the mirror. She reached up and wiped at her reflection as though she could erase it, and maybe erase the choices she had made. Seen Alfred's office dimly lit. Downstairs, Alfred sat in his office chair, fully dressed but staring blankly at the wooden floor. He'd made coffee. It had gone cold. He couldn't look at himself in the mirror above the fireplace. He didn't need to. He already knew what he'd see. A man who had crossed a line, not in a moment of passion, but in a moment of weakness. He picked up his phone twice to call Evelyn, and set it down both times. What would he say? "Hi, love. Just checking in. The kids are fine. Oh, and I betrayed you." No words felt right, so he said nothing. Juliet set the children's cereal bowls in front of them, mechanically pouring milk, spooning sugar, adjusting napkins. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tried to smile. "Eat up, darlings," she said softly. The children dug in cheerfully, oblivious. Alfred entered the kitchen moments later. Juliet didn't turn around, but she felt him like gravity. Their eyes met for half a second, and that was all it took. A flash of the previous night passed between them. The breathless whispers, the heat of skin on skin, the forbidden sounds swallowed by darkness. Juliet quickly looked away. Alfred coughed awkwardly and muttered, "Morning," before grabbing a glass of juice and stepping outside. Later that day, Juliet sat at the edge of her bed, knees pulled up to her chest. The sunlight through the curtains streaked across her face, exposing her puffy eyes and clenched jaw. "It was a mistake," she said to herself, but her heart didn't believe it, not fully. There was a part of her, a small, shameful part, that remembered his touch, not with regret, but with longing. And that was what scared her the most. In the study, Alfred pretended to read a report. Every line blurred into the next. What had begun as a lapse in judgment now threatened to unravel everything he held dear. His marriage, his family, his self-respect. And yet, when he closed his eyes, all he could see was Juliet, standing in the flickering light of the television, her silhouette outlined by shadows and temptation. "It can't happen again," he muttered to himself. But even as he said it, he knew the thought was a lie. Because temptation doesn't just vanish. It waits. That night, the house seemed even quieter than before. The children were asleep. The hallway creaked. The clock ticked loudly in the living room. Juliet lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every second of the night before. She hated herself, and yet, she couldn't stop thinking about him. In another room, Alfred paced. His breathing was shallow. His hands trembled slightly when he thought of her skin, her voice, her scent. They were both haunted, not just by what they had done, but by the desire to do it again. Guilt can be a cruel companion. It whispers, claws, it lingers. But the worst part? Sometimes guilt walks hand in hand with desire. And in that house, behind locked doors, desire hadn't left. It had merely gone quiet, waiting for the next moment of weakness, waiting for another opportunity, waiting to strike again. Secrets have ears. In every household, the walls are never truly silent. They absorb whispers, echo footsteps, and carry the weight of secrets. And in the Alfred household, the air had changed. Something unspoken lingered, heavy, invisible, but undeniably present. That night, while the world outside slumbered beneath the Lego skyline, a soft creak came from upstairs. Toby, the eldest of the 3 children, was curled up in bed with his eyes wide open. He wasn't asleep. He hadn't been. Not really. Earlier that week, he'd started noticing little things. Things that didn't quite make sense. Like the way Juliet suddenly grew quiet when Daddy entered the room. The nervous smiles. The lingering silences. The hush in their voices after dark. And then, there was that night, the night when he'd woken up to use the bathroom and heard muffled voices in the living room. Then footsteps. Then silence. Then a door clicking shut. He didn't understand what it meant. Not fully. But even at 7, children can sense when something is wrong. The next morning, as Juliet helped pour cereal, Toby watched her closely. "Auntie Juliet," he said, spoon in hand, "why did you and Daddy whisper last night?" The question fell into the room like a grenade. Juliet froze. Alfred, who had just lifted his coffee mug, nearly dropped it. "Whisper," Juliet repeated, forcing a casual smile. "Yes," Toby continued innocently. "I came out to pee and I heard your voices. Then you stopped when I opened my door." The other 2 kids were busy fighting over a spoon, oblivious. But Alfred and Juliet shared a terrified glance. "Sweetheart, maybe it was the TV you heard," Juliet said gently. "No," Toby said flatly. "There was no TV sound. It was just you 2 talking. Then it got quiet." Juliet swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly. Alfred cleared his throat. "Toby, eat your breakfast," he said quickly, the stern edge in his voice betraying the panic underneath. Toby obeyed, but he kept staring. Children notice things adults try to hide. Not because they understand, but because they feel. And Toby felt something had changed. Juliet was no longer just their nanny. She had become part of a secret that now tiptoed between every corner of their home. Juliet closed the door behind her and collapsed onto her bed, her mind racing. "He heard us," she whispered aloud. "He heard something," she corrected. But what if he remembered more? What if he told Evelyn? Suddenly, the risk became real. No longer was this a fleeting night of lust. It was a chain reaction waiting to detonate. A child's innocent question had cracked the illusion wide open. Alfred stared at his office door like someone might burst in at any second. His palms were sweaty, his breathing shallow. He poured himself a shot of whiskey at 10 in the morning, something he hadn't done in years. "I should stop this," he muttered to himself. "I have to stop this." But the image of Juliet's body in the pale light, her scent, her touch, clouded his mind. Still, the echo of his son's voice haunted him more. "Why did you and Daddy whisper last night?" It was the question of a child, but it carried the power to destroy everything. Later that evening, Toby sat quietly in the children's shared room, flipping through his homework notebook. On one page, he scribbled in pencil, "I think Daddy and Auntie Juliet are keeping a secret." He drew two stick figures close together. One had long hair, the other wore glasses like his dad. He hid the notebook under his mattress. The innocence of a child is fragile, but so is trust. And in this house, both were now in danger. Secrets can remain hidden for a while, but when they live in homes with children, they have a way of crawling out. Through open doors, through casual questions, through drawings, whispers, and silent stares. Juliet and Alfred weren't just living a lie. They were living inside a time bomb, and now it had started ticking. Guilt can be a cruel companion. It whispers, claws, it lingers, but the worst part? Sometimes guilt walks hand in hand with desire. And in Evelyn returns. When Evelyn boarded her return flight to Lagos, she had no idea what had unfolded in her home. She had left behind structure, order, and trust. But in just 5 days, that trust had started to rot. She wasn't supposed to be back yet. The conference in Abuja had ended early. She didn't tell Alfred she was coming home. She wanted to surprise him, reconnect, be spontaneous. It had been a long time since she did anything spontaneous. It was a quiet Thursday morning. Juliet was in the backyard hanging laundry. Alfred, still in his robe, was sipping lukewarm coffee, lost in thought. Then the front door clicked open. He looked up, and there she was, Evelyn, rolling in her suitcase, smiling, tired, but happy to be home. "Alfred?" she called out. He stood, stunned, frozen like a criminal caught red-handed. "Evelyn, you're back early." "Surprise!" she smiled, stepping forward and planting a soft kiss on his cheek. "I missed you." He couldn't even fake a smile. He just stared at her, 1,000 thoughts racing through his mind, each more dangerous than the last. Juliet, hearing the voice from outside, froze behind the clothesline. Her heart skipped. She wasn't ready. No one was. Later that day, Evelyn unpacked her bags in the living room while Alfred sat silently nearby. She talked about the conference, who she met, what she learned, but Alfred barely responded. She noticed. "You've been quiet since I got back," she said, half laughing. "Just tired," he muttered. She looked at him, long, hard. "Are you sure?" He nodded. Too quickly. She didn't press. Not yet. Over the next 24 hours, Evelyn noticed things. Small things. Juliet, who used to greet her with bright smiles, now looked nervous, unsure, overly polite. The children, especially Toby, seemed to act strangely around both her and Juliet. The boy kept staring at her, then quickly turning away. And Alfred was clearly hiding something. One night, as she entered the kitchen, she caught Juliet and Alfred standing too close, too quiet. Their eyes widened when she entered. They stepped apart like magnets being forced away. She didn't say a word, but the seed had been planted. Late that night, Evelyn sat alone in her bedroom, flipping through photos on her phone. Pictures of her children, smiling with Juliet at the playground. pictures Alfred had taken and sent her. She zoomed in on one. Juliet and Alfred standing side by side, smiling, too close. A knot formed in her chest. She looked at her husband asleep in bed beside her. Back turned, breathing steady. Too steady. She stared at him for a long time before whispering, "What did you do, Alfred?" Suspicion is a quiet poison. It starts as a whisper in the back of your mind, then grows louder, feeding on inconsistencies, silence, and shadows. And now Evelyn could hear it, louder with each passing day. Juliet was avoiding her. Alfred was avoiding everything. And Toby, her sweet, observant boy, was drawing strange things in his notebook. The perfect order she had once left behind was unraveling. But the question remained, what had she truly come back to? The confession. There comes a point when silence becomes heavier than truth. When every step feels like it echoes with guilt. When the walls of a house close in, not physically but emotionally. Juliet had reached that point. The woman who once walked with quiet confidence was now a shadow of herself. And she knew she couldn't stay any longer. It was 4 a.m. The house was still. Even the crickets outside had gone quiet. Juliet sat at the small desk beside her bed, a dim reading lamp casting soft shadows across her face. In front of her was a blank piece of paper. Beside it, a pen trembling in her hand. She stared at it for a long time. The words wouldn't come. How do you confess what you can't even explain to yourself? But eventually, she began to write. Dear Evelyn, there are no words to truly say what I feel, but I owe you honesty. Not because you'll forgive me, but because I can't keep pretending. I can't stay in your home, live among your children, and carry this weight anymore. I crossed a line, a deep one, a dangerous one. I take full responsibility. It happened in a moment of weakness, not love, not even lust, but confusion, pain, loneliness. I am ashamed of myself, and even more ashamed for staying after I should have left. Please know, I never meant to hurt you, or your family. I have already packed. By the time you read this, I will be gone. Please hug the children for me. I am so sorry, Juliet. With trembling hands, she folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. On the front, she wrote one word, Evelyn. She left it on the kitchen counter. Then, barefoot and quiet as a ghost, Juliet wheeled her small suitcase down the hallway. She stopped at each child's door. Toby, Ada, little Aoife, and whispered goodbye through the wood. No one stirred. Then she walked out the door and into the darkness. The next morning, Evelyn entered the kitchen with her coffee, expecting another quiet day. Instead, she found the envelope. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. As she read, her hands began to shake. By the time she finished, tears welled in her eyes, not just from betrayal, but from heartbreak. She sat down, hard. The walls of her world crumbled. Minutes later, Alfred entered the room and found her sitting there, silent, shaking, holding the letter. Their eyes met. He knew. Without a word, she placed the letter on the table between them. Did it happen? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alfred opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to defend, no lie that could erase what had been written. Yes, he said finally, one word, and with it 20 years of marriage broke. Not in anger, but in grief. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come with screaming, comes with silence, and silence is much harder to forgive. Juliet had left behind a confession, but the damage stayed behind. Consequences. Confessions may offer release for the guilty, but for those betrayed, they leave behind devastation. In the Alfred household, nothing felt the same anymore. Juliet was gone, but her absence didn't bring peace. It only confirmed the worst, that something had happened, and that nothing could ever go back to how it was. Evelyn sat at the breakfast table, staring blankly at the untouched cup of tea in front of her. Alfred sat across from her, silent, nervous, broken. The letter still sat between them, folded, worn from how many times she had reread it. "You could have told me," she finally said, not looking up. "I didn't know how," Alfred whispered. "You lied every day I was gone. Every single day." "It was just once," he said. Her eyes snapped up. "Just once is enough to break everything, Alfred." She stood and walked out of the room. That morning, the house, once warm and filled with laughter, felt like a stranger. 3 days passed. Toby stood in the hallway with his backpack, looking up at his mother. "Mom, where's Auntie Juliet?" Evelyn crouched to his level and tried to hold her voice steady. "She had to go, sweetheart. She won't be coming back." "Did Daddy make her leave?" he asked. Evelyn's breath caught. "No, baby," she lied. "Sometimes people just have to go." But even at 7, Toby sensed the truth behind her eyes. Alfred tried to carry on with work, tried to reclaim routine, but guilt was a persistent shadow. It followed him from room to room. He avoided the bedroom, slept on the couch, ate in silence. Evelyn barely spoke to him. He had destroyed something sacred, not just trust, but respect. And perhaps worst of all, he had betrayed his children, not through action, but through example. What would Toby grow up to remember? What would Ada and Aoife carry into their futures? These were the questions that haunted him now. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't throw things or call her friends to gossip. She just closed off. She poured herself into her children, became more present. She smiled when they needed it, listened to every story, tucked them in with extra care. But when the house went quiet at night, she cried, not just for what Alfred had done, but for the part of herself that now felt permanently bruised. Far across the city, in a modest one-bedroom flat, Juliet stared out the window of her new place. She had found another job, cleaning offices this time. Quiet, uneventful, no children, no families. But every time she closed her eyes, she heard Evelyn's voice, saw the children's faces. She missed them more than she missed anyone in her life. She avoided social media. She changed her number. She disappeared. Not because she was running from Evelyn, but because she was running from herself. Infidelity rarely begins with hatred. It begins with unmet needs, with silences that grow too loud, with looks that last too long, and with people too afraid to ask the hard questions before it's too late. In the end, there were no winners here, only consequences. Evelyn and Alfred sat side by side in front of a therapist, not because they wanted to fix everything, but because they needed to understand what could be salvaged. It was awkward, heavy, but necessary. "Why did you do it?" Evelyn asked again. "Because I was lonely," Alfred said quietly. "And I didn't think you saw me anymore." "That's because you stopped being someone I could see," she replied. It wasn't the end, but it was the beginning of something new. Not necessarily healing, but honesty. Some families break apart and never return. Others rebuild, but differently. not as they were, but as they must become. The Alfred household would never return to what it was. But the truth had been spoken, the damage faced, the silence broken, and that sometimes is the only way forward. The lesson: not all stories end with forgiveness. Some end with clarity, others with change. In the quiet that followed the storm, everyone involved in this tangled chapter carried away something. Something personal, something painful, something necessary. Because the truth is, every secret comes with a lesson. Evelyn chose not to leave, not because she had forgiven Alfred, but because she needed her children to have stability, to have structure, and above all, to have a mother who could show them strength in the face of betrayal. She didn't forget. She didn't pretend. But she did evolve. She started her own consulting firm months later, reclaimed her independence, took the kids on vacations, built a new routine. The cracks in her heart were real, but she wore them like battle scars, proof of what she'd survived. And in time, she learned that survival wasn't about forgetting what broke you. It was about choosing to live anyway. Alfred never fully recovered, not emotionally, not spiritually. The mirror that once reflected a man of pride and success now showed someone else. He still went to work, still provided, still fulfilled his roles. But something in him had died, and he knew it. He saw it in Evelyn's eyes when she looked at him. He felt it in the way his children pulled away just slightly during bedtime stories. He carried the burden not just of what he'd done, but of what he'd lost. And in that silence, he learned something. Trust is a currency. Once spent carelessly, it's rarely earned back in full. Juliet moved 3 times in the span of a year. Not because anyone was chasing her, but because she couldn't face what she'd become. She no longer worked in private homes. She avoided relationships. She started attending church again. She wanted redemption, but didn't know how to ask for it. One day, she wrote a letter to Evelyn. She never sent it. She kept it in a shoebox under her bed. And every year, on the anniversary of the day she left the house, she read it aloud. "I was broken long before I entered your home," the letter said. "But you trusted me, and I failed you. I still pray for your children. I still see their faces in my dreams." She didn't seek to be forgiven. She simply hoped one day she would learn to forgive herself. Toby never forgot that week. He wouldn't fully understand it until years later, but the images stuck. The hush in Juliet's voice, the quiet tension between his parents, the letter he never got to read but felt the weight of anyway. He carried it into adolescence with quiet questions, into adulthood with boundaries he set carefully, and into his own relationships with honesty at the forefront. Because the greatest lesson Toby learned was that the truth might hurt once, but lies, they hurt every day. In the end, this was never just a story about temptation. It was a story about choices, about how loneliness can disguise itself as love, about how guilt can sound like silence, and about how every moment, no matter how brief, can echo for a lifetime. Some mistakes stay with us, but so do the lessons they teach. And sometimes, the greatest redemption is choosing to never make them again. If the story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the Crime Narrative channel for more true, emotional, and unforgettable stories. Until next time, stay safe and stay honest. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Hearts and Whispers channel. We tell the untold stories of love, betrayal, secrets, and truth.